Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on compliance and the 5 actions you can take now. Whether you're in IT, leadership, or compliance, today we'll cover a few important topics like knowing your jurisdiction, preparing for all types of disaster, the importance of creating a business continuity plan, and the different ways you can secure your organization's data to remain in compliance, plus a few things you might be missing. My name is Jeff Stofa, and I'll be your host for today. I'm the sales executive at Cloud Carib with responsibility for Jamaica, Guyana, Barbados, Antigua, Cayman Islands, Belize, Grenada, Turks and Caicos, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and St. Kitts, just to name a few. Joining me to answer your questions today are two very important members of the Cloud Carib team, Tong Ka and Dino Cartwright. Starting with Tong, he is our VP of Operations here at Cloud Carib. He has over 20 years experience of global operations, leading teams in systems architecture, security, and network operations. Formerly holding senior positions with Central Logic, JP Morgan Chase, Huawei, Misa, and MTS Allstream. Tong, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Steph. Glad to be here.
Dino Cartwright serves as Cloud Carib's internal audit and compliance manager. He's our own compliance manager, wherein he managed governance, risk, and compliance. He has over 15 years of experience in the regulatory, compliance, and internal audit space with training in risk management and compliance frameworks with special focus in financial services. Welcome, Dino.
Thank you so much, Jeff. It's great to be here. Thank you again.
As we wait for latecomers to join us, we have a few housekeeping reminders. This webinar is meant to be interactive and informative, so I encourage all of you to put your questions in the Q&A section at any time by clicking the 3 dots at the bottom right-hand corner so we can answer them as time allows. Join our chat, give us your opinion in our polls. To engage, just use the green Slido button that shows up in the webinar event panel to the right of your screen, and our own cloud and compliance specialists will be there to attend to you throughout the webinar. So welcome again to everyone and those of you just joining us. I want to say a special welcome to those of you joining us from Barbados. I know it's National Heroes Day there, so thank you for joining us today on your day off. My name is Jeff Stofa. I'll be your host as we tackle some specific ways you can help your organization meet its compliance needs and hopefully provide you with some things you didn't realize. Before we officially get started, I'd like to share a little bit about us, about our company, for those of you who might not be familiar with us. Cloud Carib is a Caribbean managed services provider headquartered in the Bahamas with a network of data centers spread out across the Caribbean and Latin America, including Jamaica, Barbados, the Bahamas, Panama, and Ecuador, plus Toronto. We recently celebrated our 10-year anniversary, and during that time, we've helped both public and private organizations with cloud migration, data backup, replication, disaster recovery, and other forms of cybersecurity. We're a SOC 2 compliant firm with a global team of technology professionals who help protect, maintain, and build our clients' cloud infrastructure by providing everything from patching and data loss prevention to advanced solutions with over 100 distinct levels of security and a 24/7 365 support. We were ranked number 28 out of 501 worldwide managed service providers last year in the MSP 501 list, making us number 1 in the Caribbean. We're also a member of the Cloud Security Alliance, the only one headquartered in the region, and we recently received our 6th Partner of the Year award after being named VMware's 2022 Social Impact Partner for Latin America. If you would like to hear more on how we can find a customized solution that fits your needs, our contact information will be shared with you today, or you can email us at contact@cloudcarib.com. So we're about to officially begin. So let's kick things off with a quick poll to see where everyone is on their compliance journey. Please participate. The results are anonymous. Well, I would say your participation is anonymous. The results will be shared with the group. And the first poll question is, has your organization handled a major compliance conflict in the past 5 years? Has your organization handled a major compliance conflict in the last 5 years? While everyone makes their selection, keep in mind that in today's webinar, we will look at the 5 actionable steps you can take to improve compliance within your organization. There's the poll on the right. Dino, you're the expert here at Cloud Carib, responsible for keeping our organization compliant. You're our compliance officer. So let's start with the basics. In your opinion, can you tell us why every organization, but particularly organizations in the Caribbean, our region, should be concerned about compliance?
Thank you again, Jess, for having me here today. Compliance essentially is, as we often say in the business, everyone's business. Compliance is essentially, and particularly in the region, is very important, as the latest pandemic would have brought some attention to businesses, opportunities in the region that we can take a hold of. So we definitely need everyone in place to have compliance as the top of their agenda. Several things happens when you have a strong compliance program in your company. The first is that it builds customer confidence, not only for your existing customers, but it also builds customer confidence for those who are peeking in and looking to see how they can expand to this region. They want to make sure that their information is secure. They want to make sure that everything that they would send through the region would be more or less protected. So definitely, once companies in the region are secure, then potential customers can be more comfortable with sending their business here. The second thing with compliance is that it aligns with international standards and benchmarks. So particularly for this region that is burgeoning in this space, in this IT space, or particularly in this information security space, it would do us well if we can be connected to international standards and benchmarks, so that international companies can be again comfortable with coming in and doing business with us. And then thirdly, it raises the image of the Latin American and the Caribbean region, which we are a part, as safe spaces for technological advances, information security, and anything as it relates to the protection of data. And so these 3 areas are really key why we should be supporting a strong compliance and a strong and resilient compliance program within each of our organizations.
I think we might have lost Jeff momentarily there, so I will
Gotcha.
pick up from where you left off. Hi, everyone. This is Olivia Dorset. I'm the marketing director at Cloud Carib. So that's a great response there, Dino. So just to pick up where Jeff left off, I guess the next question will go to Tong. How has the role of compliance shifted over time, and would you say that it's gained more relevance and importance for work from home policies?
Sorry about that, guys. It looks like I just got kicked out for 1 second. But I heard most of what you said, Dino. And for my follow-up question, you mentioned COVID. Can you talk a little bit about how compliance has changed during the time of COVID over the past year with everything that's been going on?
Definitely. One of the key things that we've seen is work from home has become now the new norm for companies. And so, what compliance does is it ensures that while persons aren't in the 4 walls, or while they aren't reporting to work as they would have customarily done, and data, while it is at rest and also while it's in transition, is always secure. That policies and procedures are definitely tweaked, and there are necessary pivots made by management to ensure that staff are now aware of the new policies and procedures that are in place that govern not only internal compliance, but also as a part of working from home, it covers the safety and security of customer information and as well as organization information, even when they are not on the grounds and not necessarily connected to the in-house server. And so definitely over the past 2 years, while we have now adjusted to this working remotely, compliance has become definitely a key part of the conversation as it relates to the safety, security, and the privacy aspects of our customer information.
Perfect. Very interesting. Let me focus back on the poll question. I think that everyone has responded. It looks like it's almost a tie as far as has your organization handled a major conflict in the past 5 years. 37% said no, and 32% said yes. So it's almost half and half. That's very interesting. Tong, I want to bring you into the conversation now. Now that we've covered the basics, in your experience traditionally, what is an organization's biggest concern surrounding compliance? If I can just suggest three broad categories you might choose from, they would be security, data processing, which would include handling, destruction, and retention of data, and data sovereignty.
Yeah, I think one of the first things we need to establish is what is exactly compliance and what are we discussing. So, you can think of compliance as being comprised of the activities that ensure that you're adhering to established guidelines, specifications, or policies. And this spans, a number of disciplines and subject areas, with three primary ones being the ones that you mentioned, which are security, data processing, and data sovereignty. And I'll just discuss a little bit about each of those subject areas. So, security, we all know, in this day and age with cybersecurity concerns and all of these hacks and DDoS attacks that we see all over the place, it's a very top of mind for everyone, and regardless of what industry you're in. So it's very important, and it spans multiple controls that have to be placed in distinct areas every step of the way. You can't be satisfied with, for instance, if we look at physical security, you can't be satisfied with just having a control at your door where you have an access card and you let somebody in. You also need to have someone overlooking who is coming in and is that person who they say they are, because if I get your access card, I can come in, and if that's the only security control you had in place for that, then I've just bypassed any security that you had. So that's just an example of security being multi-layered, and that would apply not only to physical security but information security, which is again top of mind for everyone these days. In terms of data processing, it's very important that organizations are aware of how they handle their data in terms of processing it, how they store their data, how they destroy it, depending on what standards they need to adhere to, and also how long or how short they should retain the data. So that's all around data processing. In terms of data sovereignty, the primary concern there is to ensure that the data that you're processing, handling, or storing is not subject to access from foreign entities or governments that you have no control over. So a good example of that would be if I have a business in the Bahamas, for instance, and I host in a US public cloud. My data is hosted in the US. And so that data now is subject to the US Cloud Act, which the government of the United States has full control over. So if they really wanted your data, they could get it just by going to that public cloud provider and forcing them to hand it over. So again, we need to be very cognizant of where we host our data, whether or not it's a global economy these days. So, people are hosting their data all over the place. But that's something to keep in mind when you're processing any data, whether it's your own or customer data.
Can you address some of the ways that technology can help in these areas? It's a little bit of an overlap because you've kind of touched on it, especially with data sovereignty, but how does technology and some of the technology and solutions we offer help compliance officers with these three areas?
Yes, I think we've come a long way in terms of technology, and these days there's lots of options and alternatives for how you handle information security and all of these things that we've talked about. So a lot of that is due to automation. So automation of processes, procedures, Instead of having someone, look at a report every day, as I used in my example, you could have an automated process where, you have an approval process in place where that says, Tonka is able to access our data center today. And when I use my access card, the system will look and ensure that I have an approved access that has been approved by the organization to let me in. So that's an example of automation being key in helping in terms of technology, because we're all human and we're all bound to make a mistake here and there. But if we have a solid process in place that's backed by technology to ensure that it's done accurately, then that goes a long way.
Got it. As far as verticals, do you feel that there's certain verticals that should be more concerned about compliance issues, especially in relationship to IT, or is pretty much everyone in the same boat?
Yeah, I think everyone's in the same boat in terms of making sure that they're compliant and that they are adhering to what they need to. But in terms of verticals, definitely there are some verticals that are more, I guess, they would need to be more cognizant of it. So that would include healthcare, for instance, public sector, and financial institutions. And the common ground between all of those three, or the common factor, would be that they handle a lot of sensitive data on a day-to-day basis. So as soon as you start handling people's ID information, social security, for instance, their government IDs, driver's license numbers, dates of birth, credit card numbers, that sort of data, or as we refer to it as personally identifying information, you're held to a higher standard when it comes to compliance.
Got it. Dino, back to you now. Let's talk about some specific ways an organization can really bolster their compliance strategy. I think you have a unique role because you have to be concerned about our own company's compliance, but yet we have all these customers that we're also taking care of. We mentioned security, and specifically data security is often a major compliance concern, but that's kind of a pretty broad banner. Can you talk about some of the immediate considerations when managing an organization's data and even protecting what we refer to as PII, identifying?
So Tong would have given some very great examples of PII. That would be your social security, or in the Bahamas, we have the national insurance numbers, your phone contacts, anything that attaches your name, I'm sorry, who the person is to their information, anything that more or less makes that a clear line between who the person is and how we can identify them. Those would be considered as PII, or personally
Okay.
identifying information. So what happens is, in order to ensure that companies have this area secure, there are several things that must be done. One, they should know where all of their information is at every juncture of the stage, whether it's at rest, whether it's in transmission. They have to have a clear idea of where all of their information is at the right time. They can do this also by performing key risk assessments. Risk assessments are very important for companies so that they can know exactly where the hotspot areas are, or where they are most vulnerable. Or also where the information is stored, and if that place where it is stored, if that information is highly susceptible to any hackers or any third parties that are not a part of the organization, or that would not mean your organization well. Companies should know exactly what is the state essentially of all of their information. Next, there ought to be use of encryption standards for companies, also stronger policies and procedures to ensure that who has access to this information, and what they should be doing to ensure that this information is kept secure. And anybody who goes into, as Tom would have mentioned earlier, a virtual data center, or who has access to where this information is stored on the server. You should know who's coming in, who's going out. You should know everything as it relates to that, and there should be proper tracking. And this can be done through proper connection with managed service providers. Also, employee education is important. Each employee of your company should go through the necessary security awareness training. They should go through the necessary training portals, whether in person or online, to ensure that everybody knows what they should do with information, what they should do in the case of phishing, hacking instances, or anything that can pose a potential danger to the company and its information. Another final thing is that every company should classify the PII. You should classify it in terms of what is important, what is not as important, and then if that time for holding that data is over, or if the holding period for that data protection is over, or keeping that data is over, you should ensure that it is done away with or declassified as safely and as quickly as possible. So those are just some steps that persons can use to ensure that their data is secure at any stage of their business.
I'm curious about the dangers of PII being stolen. Are you seeing an increase in sophistication in what hackers and kind of people can do with this personal information that's even worse now than 10 years ago? What are kind of some horror stories, I guess I could just...
We've definitely seen an uptick in the amount of phishing
Yeah,
scams that have been coming through emails, and we find that a number of this information is sold in the dark web for the purposes of selling or for the purposes of cold calling. And so you would see even now an uptick of persons who are more or less hacking into your system, getting your information, and then trying to defraud persons who you are connected to or persons who you know.
yeah.
From some money or using some ransomware or anything on that nature. So we see that with the increase of persons using technology now who may not be as technologically savvy, they may be more susceptible to these kind of hacking and these kind of risks. And so we've seen an uptick in that. And so the hackers are using this opportunity where more persons are using coming on, and they're not as technologically literate as others. Then we see this happening. But definitely, once you have a strong managed service provider on your side and you have a strong policy and procedure in place, then we see that this has helped to mitigate some of the issues that we've been seeing over the past couple months.
Yeah, exactly. Very interesting. Uh, Tong, I want to go back to you and talk about terminology. There's two terms that get thrown about, and I think there's a little bit of confusion: business continuity plan and disaster recovery plan. I think it's important to understand the difference between the two. Can you explain?
Sure. I think those are two terms that people easily get confused by. So let's start with the disaster recovery plan. The disaster recovery plan is basically a set of policies, procedures, and processes that are in place to ensure that you have a documented method of recovering from an IT disaster. So basically, the primary goal there is to what do you need to do to restore IT operations to normal operating standard. And that's the primary purpose of a disaster recovery plan. Now, a business continuity plan, that is the overarching strategy as to how to continue operations should anything occur. So that would include the disaster recovery plan where you have an IT outage, but it can include things like what happens if we can't get to the office? How do we work from home? What manual processes are in place to fill in while our IT infrastructure is down? So that would be the business continuity plan, and that also includes how do we communicate this to our stakeholders, so our employees, to senior management, to our vendors, to our customers. Anything that happens that would be considered a disaster, and it doesn't have to necessarily be an IT disaster, would be part of the business continuity plan.
So in other words, if a tree falls on the street in front of my company and my employees can't get to their servers that are all on premises, that's a business continuity issue. But if a hurricane comes through, that's a disaster recovery issue, correct?
Yeah, so a disaster recovery issue would be anything that impacts your IT infrastructure. So it more has to do with technology and something that happens to do with technology. But you made a good example there. If a tree falls in front of the office and the employees can't get in, can they work from home? Can we continue operations? Because that's not necessarily IT related, but it
Right.
still impacts your business, right?
Yeah. Interesting. Those are good insights. Okay, I just want to remind everyone to feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A tab. You can send them to me and I'll be happy to ask our two panelists, or you can join the chat with our panelists. Let's do the next poll. You're going to see it show up in the bottom right. And the poll question is, in relation to my last question, does your organization have a business continuity or a disaster recovery plan in place? Okay, everybody, we've covered what the role of compliance is, as well as some of the major compliance concerns as it relates to issues like data security and business continuity. Dino, please tell me, how important is knowing your jurisdiction's specific rules and regulations?
Thank you again, Jeff. In my former life, I worked with the regulators, and so I've seen firsthand what can happen when companies don't apply or aren't adherent to to a jurisdiction's policies, procedures, rules, regulations, any laws. We can see that it can open them up and make them vulnerable to things like fines and to fees. And when it comes to fines and fees from regulators or anybody who is in a governing authority in a region or in a jurisdiction, these fines and fees are not only limited in instances to the company itself, but it can also reach down to the particular person in place. So, for instance, in the banking field, the money laundering reporting officer, if there is some breach or anything like that, they are actually personally, they, in addition to the particular financial institution, the MLRO is also held accountable for this, and they too can be levied a fine. And so it is in everybody's interest to ensure that information is kept safe, that everything is compliant according to the jurisdiction, and that's why it's so important to have someone on staff or someone who you are connected with who has knowledge of what the countries or the jurisdiction's laws, precepts are, and also to ensure that you are kept up to date with ever-changing laws. Because as we can see, since COVID came about, there were some new laws, a compendium of laws that were introduced to ensure that there is data security, to ensure that there is data loss prevention. And so you would want to ensure that you are kept up to date, follow your regulators, make sure that you have a connection with your local attorney general or your local legal body in your jurisdiction to make sure that you are kept safe. Another thing is you can also avoid blacklisting, not only in your jurisdiction, but any other international body that your jurisdiction is connected to. You would want to ensure that you are compliant and that you help to secure your jurisdiction in blacklisting as well. So not only should you be concerned.
Can you explain what blacklisting is?
Sure. Blacklisting is essentially being set on a list of companies or countries, that are not compliant with overall international standards and laws.
Okay.
And so now you are more susceptible to loss if you choose to do business in this country or you choose to do business in this jurisdiction. And so it's more or less a warning to persons who are potential or prospective clients or prospective persons who want to become involved in the economy, that listen, you can come here, but it's at your own risk. And so that's what blacklisting does. It also helps, it also avoids some necessary financial transactions taking place. And the final thing is that it allows you to continue in business, because if your business is not compliant with the laws of the land, then the regulators or the governing authority of that country is actually going to can actually shut down your business license, and so you may not be able to operate in that jurisdiction anymore. And so it's very important that we are aware of all of our jurisdictions, policies, governing laws, and also not only your particular jurisdiction, but all those other connecting bodies that your jurisdiction has signed on to, and you would need to know that information as well.
Perfect. Very interesting. I want to announce the results for this last poll. Does your organization have any of the following? 53% said they have both a business continuity plan and a disaster recovery plan. 18% are unsure. 12% said just business continuity. 12% said neither. 6% said just disaster recovery. So that's very interesting. For those of you in unsure, business continuity only, disaster recovery only, neither, feel free to give us a call, give us an email. We'd be happy to give you kind of a free consultation about that. And I want to add, and maybe you two can comment on this, but in my experience as a sales executive, I've often met with companies that would tell me, I have a disaster recovery plan. I have a business continuity plan. And then when we actually analyzed it, we were able to show them how there were maybe some vulnerabilities. Sometimes people feel like they have a plan, but it can be a good idea to get an outside opinion to make sure that they really do. Can either of you comment on that, Tong, maybe?
Sure. Yeah, I think you make a good point there. I think that with critical documents such as the disaster recovery plan and the business continuity plan, it always needs to be evolving. So it can change from week to week, day to day, even depending on the nature of your business. And it's always good to have another set of eyes to take a look, just to ensure that you're not missing anything. And as I said, they should be evolving. So you can start out with a simple disaster recovery plan that covers your most critical applications, for instance. But there may be areas where you might not be aware of that you may have missed, and that's where organizations such as ourselves, who have a lot of experience in working with companies and refining their disaster recovery plans and suggesting and recommending best practice. I think that plays a key part in ensuring that your disaster recovery plans evolve in a way that will align with ensuring that your business continues to operate in an efficient manner.
It's very interesting. I'll tell you a real life story. I have a client that when I met with them, they said, we have a disaster recovery plan. We back up to a server on the same rack as the original server, and then on fire, and it all caught on fire. So they thought that they had a disaster recovery plan, but then we helped them to back up to a completely other location in a data center offshore. And so then they really had a stronger, I shouldn't say they didn't have a disaster recovery plan, but they had a much more stronger one after we talked to them. Okay, we have another poll coming up that's about to pop up. And the question is, does your organization have effective protocols in place to identify and manage risk? So please participate by making a choice there. I know we're getting some questions from the audience, so I'm going to get them in a moment. But I just wanted to say I was taking some notes as you two were speaking, Tong and Mr. Cartwright, and I'm kind of seeing that there's 5 major areas that, in our opinion, compliance officers should be focused on when it comes to IT and compliance. Number 1 is securing your data, prepare for any disaster, create a plan, know your jurisdiction, and protect your sensitive data. Tong, if you could maybe go over those 5 and talk about how, without getting into too much detail, but you may have those 5 points successfully.
Sure. You broke up a little bit, Jeff, there, but I think I got the gist of what you were asking. So, in terms of those points that you made, securing your data, again, security is a multi-layer. It has to be done in a multi-layered approach. And when we're talking about data, let's talk about information security, for instance, as an example. You want to ensure that when you're transmitting your data, and these days it doesn't matter if it's sensitive data or not, we need to transmit it securely. So what does that mean? That means encrypting the data so that it's not in clear text, so that if someone just comes across it by whatever means that they have, they don't see, my date of birth is attached to this person's name. And my driver's license, for instance, it's encrypted. So they would have to do a lot more work in order to get that data. Now, again, bad actors are going to have a lot of tools at their disposal to get at your data. So the more security controls you put in place, again, layering on top of one another, the harder you make it for them to get to that data. So again, we talked about how to secure data in transmission, but also when you're storing your data, When you're storing it in an IT system, you want to make sure it's encrypted as well, so that when they get it, they would need to be able to get something else, and that would be the encryption keys, for instance, to be able to decrypt that data. But that really goes for physical data, a piece of paper. We heard about compliance and clean desk policy. So the clean desk policy would talk to ensuring that whenever you leave the office for the day, you're going to lock up all of your papers and data, or anything that holds data, locked inside your cabinet. Again, it's not going to mitigate everything, but it's better than leaving it on your desk where anybody passing by can just take a look. So again, security is a very broad subject. So it applies to not only digital security, but also physical security. So sorry, Jeff, what was the next the next point that you wanted me to address?
Um, I think that's good. I just noticed that we're getting some questions from the chat that I'd like you to address. So I think
Sure.
it's a good time to move on. I have a question from Kendall Robbins. Can you speak to compliance in a cloud? I'm going to just throw this out to both of you, and you can decide who wants to take it. Can you speak to compliance in a cloud-based deployment?
Sure, I can take that if you'd like. Yeah, so in a cloud-based deployment, it again, compliance applies to everything. So when we're talking about compliance in the context of the discussion we're having today, we're really talking about information security, and how does your organization handle and process the data of your own and your customers? So when it comes to cloud deployments, you need to ensure that you have the proper security controls in place. Again, at multiple layers, to ensure that someone can't just come in, with a password and be able to get at your data. So, for instance, at the operating system level, I'm getting into a little bit of technical details here, so forgive me. But at the operating system level, so where we have Windows, everybody uses Windows as their operating system. But a lot of servers use Windows Server as their operating system, and you have critical security patches that are released every Tuesday by Microsoft. So you need to ensure that those critical security patches are in place on your servers. A lot of times, organizations will stand up a server in a cloud deployment and forget about it. It's they will stand it up and not patch it for years, and that makes it very susceptible for bad guys to come in and be able to get access to that server and all of the data that resides into it. And the implication of that is that once they get access to the server, they don't only have access to that server and the data residing on it, but that server is probably connected to a network. And so now they have access to all of those servers and computers on that network as well, if you don't have the proper security controls in place. So compliance is very important in any deployment, but especially a cloud deployment, because typically when you deploy in the cloud, you have internet access, and you need to ensure that you have the proper network security controls in place, operating security controls in place, and data access security controls in place to ensure that only authorized individuals or authorized people can access that data.
But at the same time, if I can just interject and piggyback on Kendall's question, on premises and infrastructures on premises can be just as vulnerable. I think sometimes I find when traveling in the Caribbean that a lot of people feel that as long as they're on premises, they're safe from ransomware attacks. Ransomware attacks only happen in the cloud, and as long as you stay on premise, you're much safer, and it's much more dangerous to be in the cloud. And we try to have conversations about the fact that often that's a perception because in the United States, by law, you have to publicize any ransomware attack, and in the Caribbean, you don't. So I hear about ransomware attacks on premises all the time, but the public in the Caribbean do not. Can you address the on-premises versus cloud compliance also?
Yeah, I think having data on premise as opposed to the cloud, being better in terms of what you've heard, it's actually giving a false sense of security, because if you take a look, a lot of times data breaches happen more so from internal sources than external sources. So having it on premise, now you have more people with access to your data or to your applications, to the servers that are hosted on premise. In addition, when you have your applications and data and servers on premise, it's actually usually less secure than having it in the cloud, because in the cloud there's a lot more controls that are put in place because of the compliance of the organization hosting that data. They would need to be compliant with many more standards than typically on premise, because again, on premise, it's up to your IT security team and what they believe is best, and that might not necessarily align with best practice. So again, but of course, it could also be good security that's in place. But again, just making that assumption that on-premise is safer than the cloud, again, is giving a false sense of security.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I want to move to another question. By the way, if you see the word chat on the right-hand side, just click on that little triangle drop down to see where people are typing in questions if you'd like to ask a question. Kevin Kinsella has a question. How often should you test your plan? And I assume he means both business continuity and disaster recovery plan. And if I can add to that question, how do you test a business continuity or disaster recovery plan? I can answer that.
So what happens? I'll field this one for whether it's a disaster recovery or business continuity. Ideally, the standard is once per year for that. But there are some companies that also have twice a year, or how often they would see that the need is, or how quickly evolving the environment that that particular company is operating in is changing. Then there would be a need for a look at, even if it's only at high level, on if the BCP plan is still relevant to what the environment is about. For instance, how we had a change over the past 2 years with a lot of on-premises work being taken to work at home, then there needs to be a change in our BCP plan, making sure that, okay, now the persons are working from home, what new protocols need to be in place, what new standards need to be in place, what new protection needs to be in place. And so as often as there are changes in that environment, or as often as there are threats that are in that environment, then that can be done. These testing, can be done through what is considered tabletop testing, where there would be a testing of that environment on what would happen if this particular event happened, playing out a scenario with various subject matter experts in the field who carry out these particular tabletop tests. This can be done that way, or there can be an actual testing that can happen while the company is still operational. So what happens is there is what is considered a sandbox testing, whereas there is an alternate site that is taking place that has the same layout, same infrastructure that the company has. And for persons who are doing the testing, they run a test on that alternate site or the alternate environment to see and to find out where there are holes, where there are various vulnerabilities, and they would change it, and then they would do a retesting to ensure that all of the issues are mitigated. And so the short answer to that is, as often as that company or that environment has changes or they are susceptible to threats, I would advise that BCP or disaster recovery plans are carried out.
Perfect. Kevin just wrote thank you.
Not a
Great.
problem.
I got another question via email. I noticed there are less announcements in our region when it comes to data compromise or breaches. Why do you think they occur less frequently than in the United States or other countries? Does that have to do with what I said before, that the laws are different, that they don't have to be publicly announced the way they are in the States?
Correct. I would say that that can be a reason why companies within this jurisdiction, you don't see that. It doesn't necessarily give us a false. We should not use this as a false sense of security that it's not happening, but there may not be necessarily a cause or a reason why they are not being highlighted in the public domain, but they are still happening. So it is definitely imperative that companies are carrying out the necessary security procedures, that they are necessarily doing their BCP testing, their disaster recovery testing, and then definitely there should be a strong compliance program within these companies to ensure that all of their information is secure. And there'll only be a matter of time as the maturity level of our jurisdiction continues to evolve. I'm sure that there will soon be some litigation or some legislation, sorry, that is in place to ensure that these are reported, to ensure that all of our stakeholders are indeed protected. And if we are reporting to these jurisdictions, for instance, in the case where the United States has a lot of business here in the Caribbean or Latin America, I'm sure that in the not too distant future there will be some pressures in place where we will be asked to report what is being done in the region. So definitely this would be a good time while it's not being reported to ensure that you have a strong security program in place, because as we often said, that this is not a need for false security. We have to ensure that we have a strong security in place.
Got it. Perfect. Tong, I want to pose a question to you that I had on my mind. I speak to compliance managers in the Caribbean a lot, and I meet a lot who have incredible experience, have been doing it for many, many years, but maybe don't feel very, very comfortable with a lot of IT concepts and aren't as up on the things we've been talking about, data security and cybersecurity and things like that. And maybe they also would like to make decisions as far as compliance in these areas without being completely reliant on their own IT department, having to always go through them for opinions and for feedback. Tell our audience how our team, our engineers, Cloud Carib can help them kind of navigate all these compliance issues with IT directly without them becoming IT experts, and also maybe focus on some of our solutions such as managed services and how that we are able to help with different things like data sovereignty, where they can kind of participate on their own with us. I don't know if you understand my question. Does that make
Sure. Yeah,
sense?
definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. Yeah. I think one of the primary value propositions we provide as a managed services provider with tons of experience in many areas of technology, not just compliance, is that we do so in a very consultative approach. So we will understand the business needs of our clients or prospective clients. And typically what we'll normally do in terms of an approach is conduct an assessment. Let's take a look at what you have today. Let's see where we can improve, and come to a mutual agreement as to these are the priorities that we want to undertake. And then we will apply best practices in the decades of IT experience that we have, with experts from all over the globe, with expertise in many subject areas, and create a plan to ensure that their data is protected, and that they are using their IT resources in the most efficient manner. And again, we provide a lot of consultation. It's not just about selling something, it's about ensuring that the client has the best solution in place that meets their needs, not only from a business needs perspective, but an economical perspective, because there's many solutions that can provide the same result, but what makes the most sense. So that's what we bring in terms of value, is having all of that experience and bringing it to the table and ensuring that the best solution is put forward for each individual client.
And if I can just add to that so everyone understands, this would be done remotely. So when we do our assessments, when we do our work, if we do an implementation, it is all done remotely using the internet. We don't have to actually go in there in person and make an appearance. And I want to add that, for a real life example, I know we had a company that was unsure if their firewall was compliant, and just like Tom explained, we were able to do a firewall assessment remotely. We were able to see the vulnerabilities. We were able to see the configuration problems. They asked us to fix it. We fixed it. And then in the end, they asked us to actually manage it for them. And it did not interfere with their own IT department. It's just that they had kind of a partner helping them manage the compliance with that particular firewall. So I think that would be a good kind of real life experience to underline what you just said. Now, next question. What regional Dino, you can take this one. What regional implications are there for organizations on their compliance journey? I suppose this means, this is another question about the uniqueness of the Caribbean and what's different in the Caribbean as far as a compliance journey.
On our compliance journey, we have seen that throughout the Caribbean, there are certain jurisdictions that have strong information security protocols in place, but we are still a maturing region. And so it would definitely behoove us to tie ourselves to international standards such as SOC 2, such as ISO 27001, such as these other international bodies that provide a benchmark for IT so that we can, as we mature in the space, we can also ensure that persons who are looking to come into the region to expand their reach into the region, that there is a secure place where the information is not only available, it's also protected and it remains confidential, and it's definitely available. Another thing that our region that would help our region in terms of the maturity process is ensuring that they participate in opportunities like Cloud Carib offers, where we can do assessments, where we can help them to see where the loopholes are, and to essentially give them a broad-based, honest look at what is necessary going forward. Compliance is everyone's business. Because we are a smaller jurisdiction, does not in any way exempt us from not being tied to a higher standard. And so definitely compliance should be top of the agenda for all of our companies, for all of the businesses, even governments, healthcare facilities, and any other area in our jurisdiction that handles data and that has to ensure that there is data secure within their market. And so definitely I would challenge our region to continue to learn what's new, learn what's available, to always be at the have the top of your agenda of your meetings and your training and everything like that. What is the top threats? What are the top threats? Sorry, in the region, in the industry, and then continue to be ahead of the game.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Let's wrap up the last poll. Does your organization have effective protocols in place to identify and manage risk? The winner, the biggest response was for somewhat. Oh, it just changed. Someone changed their answer. 58% said somewhat. 38% said yes. Yes is good. We got a no. Well, you somewhats, if you want to give us a call, we'll be happy to give you a free consultation to change that somewhat to a yes. Ooh, no just increased. People are changing their. I guess that's a sign of with compliance, you're kind of sure that you have everything taken care of, but you're not quite sure. So that's why I think it's so good to speak to an outside source, someone coming in from the outside that's unfamiliar with your company, to look at it with a fresh eye. We're almost done. We only have a few minutes left. I'd like to end this, gentlemen, if you would be so kind, is to give some basic advice for any compliance officers that are out there right now listening to this or might listen to this recording in the future. What is your advice as far as where to start? What kinds of things should they do? What kinds of things should they focus on first if they wanted to make a difference as far as compliance and improve compliance for their company?
As for compliance officers, the first thing to do is to know where you stand. You have to know exactly what is the health of your company's data security. You have to know what is the health of your company's policies, procedures, and these are only done through risk assessments. You would have to it's advised to do internal and also have an outside party to complete a risk assessment on your behalf, because there are some things that you aren't able to see in house that someone from the outside can come in and they can do a proper risk assessment. When we complete a proper risk assessment, knowing exactly where we are, knowing exactly what are our hot button issues, what are some things that we are focusing on that are not necessarily important, and we can now gauge where we need to focus our attention, and then from there we can determine what remediation or mitigation strategies are necessary. But the ground level is complete a risk assessment, know where you stand, know what is necessary, know where your gaps are, and then from there you can build out a strong compliance program.
Great. Tong, anything he missed?
No, I think
Rihanna?
I think that's a good summary. Again, take an assessment of where you are in terms of your security posture, and again, you have to be honest with yourself. As we saw from the poll, a lot of people, when you ask them the question, are you compliant? Is your data secure? The natural answer is going to be, of course, yes, right? But then if you take a step back and again take that honest assessment, there's always areas where you can improve, even if you do have a very high security posture.
Okay, we have one last question. Kevin Kinsella had one last question. We have 2 minutes left. What's your advice, I guess, for getting a budget for a compliance program? Should he have a business case?
Definitely.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead, Tong. So
No, go ahead.
your business case comes out of your risk assessment. Your business case comes out of your assessment to see exactly where you are, and the loopholes are the gaps that are in there. Your gaps will determine your budget, because your budget will then determine how quickly you need this done. What if there may be something that you don't see that you need to be covered by persons coming in, that they may need to be covered by a third party vendor. And in the case of managed services, you may not need to hire somebody. You just hire your managed services provider, who can more or less take the place of new bodies coming in, but they can also provide you with the necessary coverage that you would need. So your risk assessment, which would include a business case, actually covers that. And your business case that evolves from your risk assessment would essentially give you the backing for the budget that is necessary for the continuation of your business. Tong?
And yeah, I just wanted to add one quick thing. That was great, Dino. The question you should ask yourself is, what is the implication if you did have a data breach, right? I think that's the question you need to answer, and I think the answer is pretty obvious. So that would be the question I would pose.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. Everybody, if there's no further questions, I want to thank everyone for taking time out today to join today's webinar. We hope we were able to answer all your questions. We'll be sending everyone a link to a recording of today's session, as well as a number of resources you can use to improve your organization compliance stance from today's session. If you want to talk to someone here from Cloud Carib, email us at contact@cloudcarib.com. If you enjoyed this event, then be sure to join us again on May 18th for another Cloud Carib event, this time on data sovereignty, which is certainly becoming a hot topic across the region. I just want to recognize that today is, what is it called? Girls from ICT Day. So we're celebrating all the women in our company right now. And my name is Jeff Stofa on behalf of Dino, Tong, and the entire team behind the scenes. Thank you, and have a safe and productive Thursday, everybody. Hope to see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.